Well, in wireless networks, we could operate in two typical modes. One is called infrastructure mode, and the other is called ad hoc mode. In the infrastructure mode, the stations interact, exchange messages, frames, but there is an intermediate device called access point that receive the messages, the frames, and retransmit the frames. That is, the frames are exchanged only between each station and the base station called access point, and there is no direct communication between the stations. In the case of ad hoc mode, the station could interoperate directly. That is, the transmission is performed between one station to the other. Then each mode has particular characteristics, pros and cons. Typically, for instance, the ad hoc mode that is called as peer-to-peer mode is in fact a little bit simpler, but there are some issues that cannot be resolved correctly. Then we, in certain circumstances, for instance, in order to prevent or avoid collisions, we need to use the infrastructure mode. What is clear is that when we use an infrastructure mode, there is devices called access points. And when we use ad hoc mode, we don't need the use of those access points. There are typically function that we call a service set. A service set is a group of wireless network devices which share typically an SSID, that is a service set ID. Service set forms a logical network of nodes operating with shared link layer networking parameters. Between those link layer networking parameters, typically we have, for instance, the frequency, the modulation scheme, some security settings. A service set is either a BSS, that is a basic service set, or an extended service set. The BSS is defined by a basic service set ID, BSS ID, shared by all devices within it. The BSS ID, in fact, is a 48-bit label that is typically equivalent to a MAC address that conform to the MAC 48 convention used in the Ethernet networks. Like a device may have, for instance, when you need to know that a device could have multiple BSS IDs. Usually, each BSS ID is associated with at most one basic service set at a time. That is, one BSS ID per BSS. A BSS ID with a value of all ones is used to indicate the wildcard BSS ID, usable only during probe requests or for communications that take place outside the context of a BSS. This is a particular case. BSS shouldn't be used with the coverage. BSS shouldn't be confused with the coverage area of an access point known as the BSA, Basic Service Area. Then remember, BSS has, in fact, in common network parameters. Then we could have several BSS associated with the same devices, the same, for instance, access points. The SSID, the service set ID, defines a service set or extended service set. But the difference between the SSID and the BSSID is the BSSID is a 48-bit label. Instead of that, the SSID is a string, a text string, and can be 0 to 32 octets long. It's possible, typically, what we call the name of the Wi-Fi zone, the SSID, and it's clear that it could be longer than the BSSID. Then once a device has associated with a basic service set for efficiency, the SSID is not sent within packet headers. Only BSSID are used for addressing. Remember this. And sometimes a null SSID, that is an SSID with zero length, could be used. A station, for instance, may transmit packets in which the SSID field is set to null. This prompts an associated access point to send the station a list of supported SSIDs. This is one of the typical scenarios. But remember, the SSID is not the same as the BSSID. The BSSID is a 6-octet, that is a 48-bit label, similar to the MAC address of an Ethernet station, for instance, and is used to identify the BSS, that is the basic service set. There are typically several types of basic service set. The BSS, the infrastructure basic service set, the IBSS, that is the independent BSS, and the ESS, that is the extended service set. The BSS, that is the infrastructure basic service set, is created by an access point for other device to join. The operating parameters are defined by the access point. Each basic service set has a unique ID called the BSS ID, which is a 48-bit number that follows MAC address conventions. And this BSS ID is usually non-configurable. Instead of that, the SSID, yes, is configurable and could have until 32 octets. The Wi-Fi segments of home and business networks are examples of this type of basic service set. Independent BSS, IBSS, or ad hoc networks is a service set created by devices that communicate in a peer-to-peer wireless network without the use of an access point. The stations in a wireless ad hoc network communicate directly with each other. Some of the responsibilities of a distribution point, such as defining network parameters and other beacon functions, are established by the first station in an ad hoc network, but that stations doesn't relay traffic between the other stations. That is, the traffic is exchanged directly between the stations. And BSS also has a BSSID, like in the case of the infrastructure BSS. But in this case, this BSSID has typically the individual group bit set to individual and the universal local bit set to local. And the remaining 46 bits are randomly generated. A temporary network created by a cellular phone to share its internet access with other devices is a common example of the use of those independent BSS. Finally, the extended service set, the ESS, is a wireless network created by multiple access points, which appears to users as a single seamless network, such as a network covering a home or office that is too large for reliable coverage by a single access point. It is a set of one or more infrastructure BSS on a common logical network. Typically, for instance, if there is more than one BSS, infrastructure BSS, in fact, this means that there is more than one virtual LAN and an IP subnet associated with each virtual LAN. From the perspective of the link layer, all stations within an extended service set are all on the same link. We talk about the same link using the same BSS. The same BSS could be provided with multiple access points. And if multiple access points provide the same BSS, from the perspective of the link layer, it is the same link. And transfer from one BSS to another is transferred to logical link control. Because remember that, for instance, we could have several BSS with different frequencies, for instance. Then we could have the same, in fact, the same BSS with the same SSID, but for instance, the same SSID with several BSS, one BSS for each of the for each frequency. For instance, for 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz. ESS make possible distribution services such as centralized authentication, for instance, and an ad hoc mode, that is an independent BSS, cannot be part of an ESS. That is, the ESS is possible only with infrastructure BSS.